the demographic challenges and the economic challenges that are coming, there's some mayors that are really in denial, and that's going to be a bit of an issue.
But Alex Pink says not all mayors are dismissing the statistics. Some, including those in Kawerau and Matamata, are already working to manage decline in their areas.
They created a wraparound program that relocated workers from one region to where the jobs were in the other region. That's the kind of response that we could actually have on the table if we start talking about the reality that's facing us. And I think that's actually a really positive opportunity for us. This isn't something we need to be afraid of.
Mr Pink says if people don't start to change their mindset, there's a risk the gap between the regions growing and those declining will widen. For Morning Report, Adriana Weber.
It's 25 minutes past 7. Well, the mother of a New Zealand woman killed by her former partner on the Gold Coast in September 2015 has urged women in abusive relationships to seek help. New Zealand man Lionel Patia was sentenced to life in prison yesterday after pleading guilty to murdering 24-year-old Tara Brown, who was born in Ngaruawahia. Patia ran her car off the road and bashed her repeatedly with a fire hydrant cover when she was trapped in the car. Well, Tara Brown's mother, Natalie Hinton, told reporters outside the courtroom she was grateful for the work of police and the supportive Australian public, and said women scared of their partners should not wait to become victims.
Seek help. Help is out there. And remember Tara when you're seeking that help.
Well, Melinda Howes from ABC News in Brisbane was at court yesterday. She told me last night that the trial, set down for 5 days in the Supreme Court, was called off when Lionel Patia changed his plea.
The trial was due to get underway this morning. He was asked what plea he wished to enter and he said guilty. This had been in discussion for a couple of days now, and his lawyer says that he had wished to enter a guilty plea but had been waiting on legal advice and psychiatrist reports before he entered that plea. So it did save the family having to go through a trial, and this matter was dealt with in court today, and Lionel Patia was sentenced to life in prison for murder.
And I guess that is one small salvation for the family, but this was a horrendous case, wasn't it? September 2015, what happened?
That's right. It was a case that really shocked Queensland and the whole country, and I'm sure New Zealand as well. The young mother, Tara Brown, aged 24, had just dropped her daughter, Lionel's daughter, at childcare. He chased after her in his car. They'd recently separated. She was trying to get away from him. He tracked her down, chased her through the streets of the Gold Coast. She was frantically calling for help. She had 000 on the line. He ran her car off the road. He got out of his car, picked up a metal cover from a fire hydrant on the street and used that to bash her through the car window as she lay trapped in the car. Neighbours came to help her and did what they thought they could to get her out, not realising that this man's intention was to actually do her further harm. He bashed her repeatedly with this heavy metal object. She suffered horrific injuries and died in hospital the next day.
And a little bit about him. He's similar kind of age, mid-20s. There were domestic violence issues, I believe, before that, and he had some gang associations, did he?
That's right. They've been in a relationship since 2011. They had a daughter together in 2012. Ms Brown's mother spoke of their past history of domestic violence. She called him a misogynist, a narcissist, a monster who took her daughter's life away and has now ruined her granddaughter's life as well with what he'd done. He was an ex-Bandidos bikie member. They had a tumultuous relationship, and that's why she was trying to get away from him before he did this.
And just some context here, Tara Brown, originally from New Zealand, but she took a protection order, we'd call it. I think you might call it a domestic violence and protection order, something of that nature. She was basically in hiding from him, was she?
That's right. In the days leading up to her murder, she had been trying to get away from him. There'd been a couple of incidents. She'd gone to her boss, who was a solicitor, who helped her get a domestic violence order. She went to a safe house. She was staying with a friend, trying to start a fresh life. But he found her through the daycare centre that their child attended, found out that she was going to be at daycare that day and knew that Tara would be there dropping her off. And that's when he pounced on her.
Melinda, I believe you were in the court when the plea was made. Any reaction even, or any words from Patia in the court?
No, he has really remained emotionless all throughout this proceedings today. He did pass a letter to the judge at one point during the hearing where he, we believe, has made some apologies to the family. His lawyer also made a statement outside the court on behalf of his client. He says that he accepts full responsibility for his actions. He knows the enormous pain that he has caused to Tara Brown's family, and he accepts the punishment imposed upon him. He said, "I know Tara will never be forgotten, nor will I ever be forgiven. I now live only for my daughter, Aria." The couple does have a 4-year-old, almost 5-year-old daughter who's being cared for by the Department of Child Safety now here in Queensland, and obviously both families are very concerned for her well-being after what's happened to her at such a young age in life.
Melinda Howes from the ABC in Brisbane, 7:30.
And coming up before 8 on Morning Report, Britain's independent inquiry into child sexual abuse gets underway in London. Also, a leading business group backs the Prime Minister's description of many job seekers being drug-addled. And we'll have more on predictions that attack advertisements will be a feature of the 2017 general election campaign. But let's get the headlines first with Nicola Wright.
A new report predicts populations in many regions will drop or stagnate within 3 decades. The Maxim Institute's report said populations in 44 of the country's 67 districts would stagnate or decline within 30 years. That could place them under severe financial strain as they try to pay for infrastructure. The hunt for the last person seen with a woman who was viciously assaulted in Auckland continues this morning. The police want to speak to the man who was caught on CCTV footage at Auckland's Pride Parade on Saturday night with the woman. She woke up at 2 the next morning in a quarry in Riverhead, injured, with the man standing over her holding a bat. The man is described as Pākehā in his late 30s, with a solid build and short hair. The accountancy firm PricewaterhouseCoopers has apologised for the mistake which saw the wrong winner initially named as Best Picture at last night's Oscars ceremony. Moonlight won the prize after La La Land was initially declared the winner. PricewaterhouseCoopers says it is investigating how the mix-up happened. The Iraqi military says it's retaken a bridge across the River Tigris in Mosul after driving back Islamic State militants. Mosul's 5 bridges have been badly damaged in fighting since October. UN aid workers say they're extremely concerned by the humanitarian situation in IS-held areas in western Mosul, where about 750,000 people are believed to be living. Rotorua is the latest district to vote in favour of shops being allowed to open on Easter Sunday. Councils have been able to decide for themselves about Easter trading since a law change last year. Rotorua's Mayor Steve Chadwick says more than 14,000 extra visitors flocked to the city at Easter, and it's about time they were allowed to spend their money there. The US President Donald Trump is seeking what he called a historic increase in military spending of more than 9%. Mr. Trump will seek to boost Pentagon spending in his first budget and slash the same amount from non-defence spending, including a large reduction in foreign aid. That's the news. Today's weather with Met Service. Kaitaia is fine with a high of 25 degrees. Whangarei, just some cloud this morning and 25. Auckland mainly fine, chance of a shower from afternoon, 25. Hamilton a few showers from afternoon and they could be heavy, also 25 degrees. Tauranga a few morning showers then fine at times, 24. Whakatane cloudy spells, chance of a shower from afternoon, 24. Rotorua a few showers from midday, might be heavy. Gisborne cloud at times, possible morning shower, 23. Napier and Hastings morning cloud and 22. Taupo a few showers, could be heavy from afternoon, 24. Taumarunui a few showers from afternoon, might be heavy, 26. New Plymouth morning cloud and 23. Whanganui a fine day, 25. Palmerston North mainly fine, could get showers this afternoon though, and 26. Masterton morning cloud, 25. Levin sunny, 25. Kapiti fine, 23. Wellington fine and 24. Blenheim blue skies and 25. Nelson sunny and 23. Westport fine and clear today, 22. Greymouth and Hokitika fine and a high of 21. Kaikoura morning cloud clearing, 20 degrees. Christchurch sunny apart from low cloud morning and night, 23. Ashburton might start with fog, otherwise fine, 22. Timaru blue skies and 20. Oamaru just some cloud this morning, 19. Wanaka fine and 26. Queenstown sunny and 24. Alexandra, Dunedin and Invercargill fine apart from some cloud at either end of the day. 25 the high for Alexandra, 20 in Dunedin and Invercargill gets to 19. It's 26 minutes to 8.
And you're listening to Morning Report. The abuse of British children sent to Australia decades ago is among the first claims being investigated by Britain's independent inquiry into child sexual abuse. The inquiry began overnight in London 2.5 years after it was set up by the government. And new evidence has now been submitted about the alleged mistreatment of some of the thousands of British children sent overseas after the Second World War, as well as claims of a cover-up. Well, the inquiry itself hasn't been without controversy. It's now onto its fourth chair. New Zealand Judge Dame Lowell Goddard was steering the inquiry until she quit suddenly last year and returned home. This report from the inquiry from the BBC's Tom Simons.
This is an inquiry with the powers of a court to obtain evidence, and so many of these people are lawyers for the victims and for those accused of responsibility. But it was for the inquiry's own barrister to set out the dark history of Britain's child migrants.
Child migration programmes were large-scale schemes in which thousands of children, many of them vulnerable, poor, abandoned, illegitimate, or in the care of the state, were systematically and permanently migrated to remote parts of the British Empire.
The liner Asturias arrives at Fremantle from Great Britain with 931 new migrants for this country.
They were being offered a new life, and countries like Australia, what was described as white Anglo-Saxon stock. But the inquiry will hear they were given little understanding of how their lives are about to change.
Many will say that they were taken without the consent or the informed consent of their parents or guardians. Many will say that they were wrongly told that they were orphans, separated from their siblings and deprived of basic details about their identities.
But this is an inquiry about sexual abuse in places like the Catholic school at Bindoon in Western Australia. Victims will come back to the land of their birth to give evidence.
The International Association will say that we were sent to what we can only describe as labour camps, where we were starved, beaten and abused in despicable ways, and all ties to our family and country were severed.
The woman who uncovered the child migrant scandal in the 1980s will also give evidence.
We want to know what's happened, we want to know who did it, and we want to know who covered it up for so long. Of course we need to know about it. There are consequences for children today.
Of the long-term consequences.
And it will be harrowing. David Hill is a former child migrant who's extensively researched the history.
That's Tom Simons reporting at 23 minutes to 8.
A leading business group is backing the Prime Minister's suggestion that New Zealand needs more immigrants, partly because too many locals rule themselves out of jobs by taking drugs. Bill English made the comment yesterday, echoing a similar view expressed by John Key last year. And the Employers and Manufacturers Association says Mr English is dead right. Here's our employment reporter, Max Toll.
Immigration figures out yesterday showed a record run of people coming to New Zealand to live or visit in the 12 months to the end of January. Bill English says companies tell him 2 or 3 times a week they're struggling to hire locals.
One of the hurdles these days is just passing the drug test. Under workplace safety, you can't have people on your premises that are under the influence of drugs, and a lot of our younger people can't pass that test.
The government doesn't require companies to keep statistics on positive drug testing. The Drug Detection Agency is employed to do that and tests tens of thousands of prospective workers every year. Its chief executive, Kirk Hardy, says while the rate of positive tests has remained at about 5%, they're doing more tests and therefore failing more people.
We've seen an increase overall in drug testing. We conduct now annually around 140,000 drug tests. I think what has been interesting is certainly an increase in the methamphetamine positive results.
The chief executive of the Employers and Manufacturers Association, Kim Campbell, says the Prime Minister is bang on the money.
Particularly where you're around heavy machinery and so on, drug testing is a requirement. And yes, many individuals are rejected. And there's a secondary problem, which the Prime Minister probably didn't mention, is that the number of people who don't actually even present for a job because they know they're not going to pass in the first place.
Graham Burke of Scaffolding and Rigging New Zealand says drug testing has become an accepted part of the construction industry in the past 10 years. But he says that that's not necessarily the main reason workers are hard to find.
Especially scaffolding is a very heavy job, heavy manual labour. It's not everybody's cup of tea to start work early in the morning and work physically all day. there is that aspect. Modern society, people like a bit lighter work, but certainly the number of people that we can recruit from the drug testing does make it more difficult.
Kirk Hardy from the Drug Detection Agency says it's not just construction companies that are increasing their drug testing. Those in other industries, such as tourism, are testing more people to make sure they don't fall foul of health and safety rules. For Morning Report, call Max Toll 10A.
It's 21 minutes to 8. Let's look a little bit more closely at those record immigration figures. 71,300 more people arrived in New Zealand than left in the year to the end of January. Arrivals were led by those on work visas, making up a third of the total. Well, let's talk more to the Labour leader, Andrew Little. He's in the Wellington studio with me. He was also listening to that previous piece. Good morning.
Good morning.
So Bill English is saying that he is hearing this anecdotally as he goes around the country. Is that something you also hear?
You hear it anecdotally, but what I hear from employers is that they want to employ young New Zealanders, any New Zealanders. I met with a bunch of horticulturalists in Hawke's Bay last year, and they said, yep, they get WINS refers to them young workers who've been out of work for 6 months or more, but often they haven't had any kind of preface to that, so they turn up there, they're not ready for work. They had a very simple request, which is, could WINS spend 2 weeks with these people who've been out of work for a long time, and some of them have used marijuana. Give them 2 weeks to get into the practice of getting up early, getting to work on time. If they test positive at the beginning of the 2 weeks, give them a couple of weeks to clean up and get it out of their system, and then turn up to a horticulturalist or a farmer or wherever and get stuck in and get into work. I don't think that's too much to ask, and what I resent deeply about the National Party and Bill English, because we heard it from him last year when he talked about young people being pretty damn hopeless, is there's all these excuses for the government not to do anything to get young people into work. How about finding some solutions to get young people into work and do the right thing for New Zealanders?
A couple of things there. Drug Detection Agency saying that it's often meth that is now beginning to show up. And what are the implications, though, for health and safety rules? Like you're saying, people being given a couple of weeks' grace, basically, before they have to be testing negative on drugs. But what about if they're having to operate machinery as part of the job during that time? Yeah, sure.
Look, employers are entitled to say, we want, anybody who's going to start work here has to return a positive test and be drug-free. That's their right to do that. And I know plenty of employers, particularly employing heavy labourers and that, saying they go through a recruitment exercise, somebody returns a positive test, they say come back in 3 weeks, and if it's a negative test and you do the right things, then we'll take you on board. So I think employers, they've got a job to get done, they need people on board, and they want to get people in work. So I think most employers take a responsible attitude. They've got to know, and I think it's pretty clear, that they want people who are safe at work. It's got to be. When you're thinking about your workmates are entitled to know that the people they're working with are safe. So no objection about that. On the issue of meth, there's no question that the meth scourge is growing, and in spite of this government's claim to have sort of clamped down on it and declared war on it, it is a big problem, and employers will tell you that.
So basically you're saying the Prime Minister's right, you're hearing the same sort of stuff anecdotally as you go around the country as well, and this is also being backed by Kim Campbell, who you heard in that previous report as well, saying the Prime Minister's bang on the money, the people are failing the tests. The difficulty here, though, is that 2 week period, and you're thinking, what, the government just doesn't step up enough here to give people a bit of a leg up into work?
I guess the question I'm posing is, why would the Prime Minister say that, particularly after his comments last year about young people being pretty damn hopeless? This all starts to look like an excuse for the government not to have to do anything, particularly about our young unemployed, which has gone up nearly more than 20,000 in the last year alone. 90,000 young people between 18 and 24, not in work, education or employment or training, and the government's does nothing about it and got no plan to do anything about it. Let's stop making excuses. And I say to young people, anybody, you return a positive test, you've got to be stood down. You can't expect to work alongside others who are safe and clean and doing the right thing.
And if people,
but you've got to be given a chance. You've got to be given a chance.
Sure. If employers though have a situation where they can employ somebody who's failing a drugs test, or they can employ somebody perhaps who's come in from overseas who's clean, What choice do you think they're actually going to have here?
Yeah, see, that's where it gets down to, and I don't accept this view that, therefore, we do a test or we decide that somebody's not fit for work here, so we're going to employ somebody from overseas. And you look at those immigration figures, 42,000, more than 42,000 people coming in on work visas. They won't all be filling skills gaps that we can't fill in New Zealand. Some of those will be people doing work that New Zealanders are fit for and can do. So,
and what's wrong with immigration to New Zealand?
Well, nothing wrong with immigration to New Zealand. We've relied on immigration. We need immigration to fill the skills gaps that we've got. But when you have a look at immigration that people are coming in, there are a growing number who are coming in to do work of a sort of a semi-skilled nature, work that can be filled by New Zealanders here.
And should that be stopped?
Should what be stopped?
Should immigration in that circumstance be stopped?
We should use immigration to manage our workforce needs and the needs that we have. We shouldn't use it as a cover to have just anybody, because we just don't want to employ somebody locally. And I don't get this. I don't accept this view that we should look for an excuse to sort of exclude people who already live here from getting work here. And look, there's always going to be rough diamonds. There's always going to be people who might need a little bit of extra effort. But if the conversations that I had with those Hawke's Bay horticulturists last year is anything to go by, they are willing and want to take on local labour. They just want a bit of help, and particularly with WINS, who are managing long-term unemployed, to make sure that the people who turn up to work on their orchards and in their farms are ready to work and fit for work.
Just very briefly, would you like to see a cap on immigration?
I don't think. No, I just don't think a cap is manageable, because the skills gaps that we have in any one year will differ from period to period. So it's not about that, but it is about looking more closely at, when employers say they need to employ offshore, let's have a closer look at what it is they're saying they can't recruit into from New Zealand before we sort of start issuing work visas for other people.
Thank you very much for your time. The Labour leader, Andrew Little, there speaking to me in the Wellington studio. It's now 14 minutes to 8.
And as we were reporting yesterday, there are predictions that attack
broadcast in the run-up to the 2014 general election. The ruling is being interpreted as giving the green light to individuals